You can't refer back to your identity or your brand or your narrative if you don't know what that is. So that really has to be where you start. And it's a lot of work, and people often don't want to do it because it's hard, and I get it, but it pays dividends down the line. You're never going to be able to scale the way you want unless you kind of have that foundation buttoned up.
I'm Nicole MacLean, and this is Content Matters, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. Our show consists of 3 parts. One, where we pull in other Composely team members to talk about content that matters to you, like a viral LinkedIn post or the latest trend. The second always includes an in-depth interview with a leading marketer, sharing actionable insights and a little inspiration. And finally, you won't want to miss the last segment, aptly called Friends Matter, where we're shouting out some of your friends and mine for their content wins in B2B marketing. Let's cut through the marketing chaos together. All right, Mike Leonhard, as the CEO of Composely, a literal content writing company, there's so many things we could do related to content, but why a podcast? And why now?
Well, other than the fact that you made a very compelling argument to launch a podcast to reach our audience, but also because I am a devourer of podcasts myself, and I find it to be an incredible medium to connect with your audience and let them get to know you a little bit better. Because I think, we get to have some fun here and have some pretty casual, but, really interesting conversations. So I love the median. Like Pod Save America is one of my favorite podcasts. Hacks on Tap is another podcast that I really like. But yeah, I'm a big fan of podcasts, and you made a really compelling argument. You're a very convincing person when you want to be, Miss MacLean.
Thank you. Maybe dive in there for a minute, because I feel like podcasts are one of those things that you can spin up. It's definitely become more lower barrier to entry to create a podcast, especially with AI, maybe than it was even 3 years ago. But doing it well takes time, investment, focus. How can a marketer who wants to make a case for budget or make a case for something like this speak to that to a CEO and get your attention?
It's funny that you brought this up, because I was just watching, there was, what are the awards that were just on?
The VMAs?
Was it the
No, the one from, the Schitt's Creek people. Dan and Eugene Levy hosted it, right?
I think so. To be honest, I didn't watch it, but I followed, the news, and I saw Baby Reindeer won awards. Have you seen that show?
No, but you've talked a lot about it.
No-name actors or actresses, not a huge kind of notoriety around it. It was just a great story. And I think the guy who this actually happened to, and the main actor and the guy who wrote the whole thing, got up to accept his award and basically said, this goes to show that it's great storytelling. It's a great story that breaks through everything else. And so I think it would always be good to come armed with data and be able to show examples of others that have done this on a modest budget, but were able to build a sizable audience. You got to get started somewhere, right? And it seems like a really great medium to be able to do that.
Yeah, 2 things in particular. One, story cuts through everything. And I think that's so important, is having that clear perspective. And as I've been developing our podcast, developing what questions we want to ask guests and making sure it's the right experience, you really have to know yourself. It's almost a little bit of kind of putting the mirror up of is what you're producing actually a reflection of your company, of your brand values, of the value of your service? Even though we're not writing content in this podcast, though there will be some blogs post-podcast, of course, that you can read. Are you getting the value?
Reach.
Yeah,
maximize
exactly.
That reach.
Repurpose. I want someone who would work with us to feel like they're getting the same value from the show as they would if they were actually a client. And you have to do some kind of internal work as a company to understand who that is and have a good story, because there is a lot of noise and AI, additional platforms, new social channels. It's so much more crowded than ever before. Podcast has always been in my mind since I started at Composely, kind of back marketing to marketers. It is such a fun medium.
What I think really gets me about those podcasts in particular is, you can tell the dynamic that exists between the colleagues, right? They're friends, they're colleagues, there's banter back and forth. And it's funny because one podcast, they have inside jokes. I don't even understand all the inside jokes, but just seeing how much there's that connection and that kind of vibe, you get a feel for who it is you're listening to and what they represent and what their values are. They joke and they have fun, but they have serious conversation. And I love geeking out on it and just listening. So it's extremely rewarding because you're learning, and they are true experts in their domain. And so it's really awesome to hear their analysis of what's going on. And then on the flip side, they choke with each other in a way that's just really endearing, sort of, it's like one guy's a curmudgeon, the other's more optimist, and it's just,
So are
it's a
you the
fun
curmudgeon
dynamic.
in this situation?
Oh, we'll let the audience determine that over time. But it depends on the day.
It does,
and how much
actually.
coffee I've had, most likely. Yeah.
Hang around for the long haul. You'll hear about Mike's love of French press. And if you need some French press recommendations, hit him up on LinkedIn. Good coffee, good conversation. If only, that's the one thing with the podcast format. Eventually we'll have to do some in-person coffee chats because there's just a vibe that you can't replicate.
And, I'd love to continue having these conversations that, will help us and help our audience to reach their audience and tell their story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really our goal. With Content Matters, one, we just fundamentally believe as a company, content does matter in every format. Good content. A lot of people are putting out maybe not so great content, but content matters. And I think there's more confusion around what that means now. I think that's our goal on the show is, mixing how to create quality with something that is actually interesting and actually has a perspective and a point of view to the audience. All right. Pod saves content. Coming soon. Just kidding.
I'm Keara Dowd. I'm a senior manager for content marketing here at Clutch. And what we do basically is we connect business service providers with buyers. So we're serving a dual marketplace. It's a kind of a unique marketing challenge in that sense. And we're really just focused on helping companies grow.
Welcome to Content Matters. Really excited for the conversation today. So one of my favorite questions to kick off is just understanding people's journey in marketing, out of marketing, to marketing. I just learned that you're a former DJ host for a radio station in DC. So I'd love to hear, how did we go from radio to content marketing?
Yeah, well, actually not quite that cool, not quite DJ radio host, but
Fair.
I studied journalism in college, and my initial goal was actually to be a broadcast sports reporter. So that was kind of the initial dream. And when I got out of college, that's everyone's dream, right? So many people share that dream. So It was challenging for me to get a job in that specifically, but I did move forward with a career in journalism. I worked at the Washington Post for a couple of years. And then I worked at a local news radio station in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm located and where Clutch is located. And I worked there for about 5 years. So really the first 7 years of my career was all spent in newsrooms, really kind of honing those editorial and narrative skills. And then when I started to feel a little burnt out from the crazy hours, right? Because it was a 24/7 situation. I'd work 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. sometimes, or 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. So really all over the place. And so I eventually made the decision to transition into marketing. And that's where I started first at a content marketing agency and then moved in-house, which is my role now with Clutch.
How do you think your background in broadcasting and journalism impacts how you approach marketing, and especially like B2B content marketing? I feel like I love when folks have kind of a unique experience getting there, because it has to kind of impact how you view things and how you lead strategy and how you make sure things kind of stand out.
Yeah, I would say the biggest impact that it has is that all of the kind of editorial planning and the strategy that I am responsible for, I always tend to anchor it back in those more journalistic editorial principles. So making sure that we're telling a story, right? That we're being kind of authentic to whatever our brand is and whatever our brand's voice is. That really I place at the center. And so it's, who are we? What are the topics that we really can be a unique authority on? What kind of unique angles or perspectives can we bring to the table? And then developing the content around that. So it doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to the SEO, right? It doesn't mean that we ignore the keyword research or anything like that, but really making sure that everything that we're putting out there is authentic to Clutch and authentic kind of to the brand that we're really trying to build and really building that voice.
Yeah, I can totally see where that journalism helps there for sure. And with all the changes of SEO recently and the algorithms not just being focused on how many times is this keyword used in a blog, but looking at, EEAT, where you have authority to talk about things, like I imagine that that's kind of put your content in a really good spot for some of the shifts we've seen in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who kind of has always anchored a lot of their kind of marketing philosophies in that, it's really nice to see the algorithms really catching up to that. I think especially in an era of AI where there are so many people who are just thinking of volume, how can we create the most amount of content? There was a little bit more of a tendency towards, I guess, replicating content, right? And really just seeing what can be generated, how can we get the most optimized content, really, instead of trying to get that engaged and useful content. And now what we're seeing is a reaction to that from the algorithms, from the SERPs, really trying to kind of catch up and mitigate that risk. So it is something that I think that our philosophy and content really anchoring it in that identity and in that story, it kind of put us ahead. So it's really nice to kind of see the whole landscape really being anchored back to that as well.
So diving a little bit into, Clutch, really curious how you approach creating content and serving both audiences of connecting, businesses to end users. What was the process of kind of building out those audience segments? And then, do you have two different content strategies? Do you have two different teams? Do you wear both hats? Just kind of asking you 18 questions right now, but kind of curious how you set up the team for success to support both sides of Clutch.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that we do have different teams that kind of focus on each. The team that I lead, the content marketing team, is definitely more focused on that buyer strategy and making sure that we're reaching our buyers where they are. And then we do have a separate team within our marketing team that focuses a bit more on our service providers. However, we collaborate really closely on kind of that content, and we also are kind of anchored in the same themes, right? So it's kind of the same stuff that's important to Clutch is important to both of those audiences, which is really about business growth, being able to get your name out there, generating leads, being able to grow when you have skills gaps, or maybe you need to be able to outsource for a particular project that can really allow your business to scale and kind of take it to the next level. Those are pretty universal themes. So we definitely tap into both for both audiences, and it's just how we kind of measure it is what changes.
Curious how you're thinking about content. Like, what is a meaty content challenge that you guys are working through?
I would say a really big challenge that's pretty unique to us is that not just the dual marketplace, but then the really broadness of our audience, even if you're just looking at the buyer side, right? Which is what my team mostly focuses on. Within that, because we have so many thousands of different service lines and service line groups that we're serving. So people can we have people coming to Clutch for everything from audio production like this and podcasting like we're doing right now, to, web development, to even like e-commerce sites. We have service lines that are really focused on utilizing AI and IT services. We really have such a large breadth of services available on our website. So to be able to really effectively market to buyers, we needed to really segment those into different personas that we could target. And that has been a real ongoing process for us that we really took the time to take a step back and think, okay, who is it that we want to be targeting the most? Who do we want to prioritize even, right? Because you want to try and target everyone, but you can't. You can't just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yep.
It's not going to work very well for you. So it was identifying a few different kind of groups that we could target and then deciding, okay, how much of our content do we want to be focused on this group? How much on this group? How much on group 3? So that really has been a weeks-long process for us, going back and forth and taking in new information and really kind of refining those. And that laid the foundation for our content strategy.
Where do you go to get that information?
Yeah, so one of the tools that we really utilize is SparkTaro. It's a really good method to be able to find, not just kind of put in your persona and your audience, but then you can see where they go, what other kind of websites that they look at. And all of that is really helpful with us. We also utilize a lot of our own internal data. And when we were doing that, we realized we were really kind of utilizing a lot of our review data to see, okay, who are the kinds of people who are leaving reviews on our website?
That makes sense.
Now, of course, that's not going to account for everyone who visits our site, but it was a good starting point for us to see who is kind of most engaged on that buyer side. So we were able to look at that and then think, okay, this is where it looks like our current allocation is. Do we want our audience to look like this? Or do we want there to be a larger part of our audience that's maybe in this section, that's maybe from slightly like larger companies or smaller companies or what have you? So we had a lot of meetings around all of that data and looking at where we currently were and where we kind of wanted to be able to bring in new parts of the audience.
So a little of current data, like what's the current state, but then also a little bit of that aspirational, okay, this might be where we are, but what do we need to do to get to what we really want it to look like?
Yep, exactly.
That makes sense. I'm just genuinely curious. You mentioned quite a number of segments and industries and service providers. How do you balance? I'm sure you can't have a writer or a marketer on your team for every single industry. Like, where do you find that sweet spot, I should say, of industry expertise and just really good content marketing and doing research and filling in those gaps?
I really anchor that back to that journalistic background, right? So in most newsrooms, most reporters are not particularly specialized. Most newsrooms have most of their reporters in kind of a general reporter type bucket. Now, those reporters might have particular interests that they're therefore a little bit more kind of engaged in those topics.
Obviously, AI has shifted a lot of things, the way content is created, the way folks are searching and trying to find information. And I think it puts even a bigger premium, if that's even possible, on authentic firsthand experience in creating it. So, a lot to dive in here, but where does brand and like a narrative play into a content strategy with where the market has shifted? And does it put more of a premium on it now that AI has kind of entered the chat?
I say yes. Each brand and each company, each entity, each person, right? We all have our own stories. I was just talking about my background and how many times have you kind of been able to see that through line, even just now in the 20 minutes we've been talking. That's the part that really makes you unique. And it's why a user, a buyer, a customer wants to come to you as opposed to a different brand. So really the way I view it, without that narrative and without really knowing who you are, it's really tough to effectively build off of that without having that foundation. That's when you end up chasing algorithm updates, right? And trying to just grab the low-hanging fruit. And not that there's not value in that, there is definitely value in quick wins. There's a reason why companies go after it. But if you really want to be building a company for the future and like a lasting brand and a lasting voice, you need to always be keeping in mind your own story and your own point of view and your own brand's authority. And I think kind of, touching it back on AI, that's something that AI can't really recreate. I know that you can put in kind of your style guidelines and you can put in some voice stuff, but that's the part that is what's going to be unique. And we're seeing that, not only it's kind of as people, I think that we think instinctively, right? Obviously, if a human makes it, it's going to be more creative. It's going to be more engaging. And we're kind of seeing that reflected now in a lot of the algorithm updates, right? Where they are valuing an element of uniqueness, an element of original reporting, something that a user can get from that piece of content that they can't get from another piece of content, like more specifically something written by AI, right? It's generative AI. It builds off of what already has been built. It's not really creating new things.
It's a pattern recognition tool.
Yes,
it's looking for the right answer, not necessarily something new or creative to stand out. It wants to answer the prompt in the best way possible.
And that there is a lot of value in that. And it does allow, I think, a lot of brands, particularly with smaller teams, like our team's not very big either. And we definitely utilize some AI tools. We don't use it for drafting our content, but
There's efficiency to be gained. For
Exactly.
Sure.
There is. Yeah, there is value, there's efficiency. A lot of these prompts do get quite sophisticated. So I'm not trying to poo-poo the use of AI. There's always a value in it for sure. But
it's just finding the right value. Like any tool,
exactly.
You can take advantage of any tool and rely too much on it. And the end quality or what it's really trying to accomplish may not be there. It's just figuring out where it fits best in your workflows.
Yeah, and in terms of where it fits in best with narrative, it can't create a narrative for you. It can't tell you your story. It can't tell you your brand story. That's something that really has to come internally. So, and you have to have that first in order to be able to utilize any of these tools effectively.
As a sales and marketing leader, I'm always interested to hear about a team's tech stack. At Composely, we use Apollo with HubSpot to fuel our outbound outreach. My team loves it. It consistently provides accurate contact information and is incredibly user-friendly. If you're thinking about changing your data provider or just want to hear more about our experience, connect with me on LinkedIn or check out the link in the show notes of this episode. Improve your inbound, increase conversion, and keep your marketing database squeaky clean with Apollo. Who do you think owns the narrative creation? Is it marketing or does it have to start from C-level and then marketing takes that and turns it into, all the marketing deliverables?
I think that's a complicated question where I don't think there's a one size fits all, right? I think it definitely depends. It's very important to have buy-in from the C-level for sure.
That's a great distinction.
Yeah. So I think that it doesn't necessarily need to come from there. If you're a part of a company that does have a founder who's really involved, that person usually can set a lot of those sites and a lot of the vision and a lot of the mission for the company. And really marketing's job is to put that into words, is how I view it. So it's marketing's job to really give that a voice and determine what that means. But you need alignment across the organization as to what that identity is. So here at Clutch, actually, our marketing team offices are right next to the sales bullpen. So we're able to hear them kind of when they're on calls. And
just so valuable.
Yeah,
the biggest
so
thing I think we've missed in a remote culture is just that overhearing client feedback and voice of the customer.
Absolutely. So we're able to hear the conversations that they're having, being able to infer what customers are asking them. And we're hearing, they talk about Clutch the same way that we're talking about Clutch. They are valuing, or they're highlighting rather, kind of the same values of that authenticity, of the reviews, of the value of just kind of really getting your name out there in your unique way. That stretches into what they do. It also stretches into what our operations team even is doing when they're looking at ways to optimize our systems and processes and trying to streamline stuff. We're always anchoring it back to that user to be like, okay, does this actually improve the experience for our service providers? Does this actually improve the experience for our buyers? And everyone needs to be talking about that the same way, or else it just doesn't work, right? We can write all the best content in the world about depicting one brand voice. And if someone then comes to Clutch and the salesperson is talking about it in a different way, that's not going to be effective. So I don't think it needs to come from the C-suite. I think it can come from a number of different places, but there does need to be that collaboration and that alignment on what that identity actually is. And then marketing's role is to put a voice to that identity.
I completely agree. And it's a hard thing for marketing. And sometimes I feel like we have to kind of play internal counselor a little bit. If there's not clarity on that, it often falls to marketing because we can't be as effective at our job. Our content can't be as strong or unique. Sometimes in sales, you talk about the nexus, what's the nexus you're going to say that really helps people know if you're a fit. Our content should be doing the same thing and kind of striking an emotion. But if there isn't clarity, that's how you kind of get vague. Oh, we don't want to offend this person. What if, and you kind of have to play counselor.
Yeah. And I think it's another kind of foundational piece that I was talking about before, right? If we're not all on the same page as to who we are, none of these strategies will be effective. We're not going to be able to effectively pull these layers and really grow a business built around our values if we don't know what those values are.
We've talked about two segments at Clutch. Oftentimes people don't just have one target market. You have nuances to that. How do you adapt that maybe central narrative to better fit and resonate with the various segments of a target market?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's not about creating different narratives, right? It's more about showing different sides of the same narrative. So I kind of like to think of it as you have your group of friends, right? And you probably have one friend who really likes to check out new restaurants. So like that's the friend you're hitting up when you want to go out to dinner. You maybe have another friend who is really active. So if you want to go on a hike, you're like, oh, Nicole, come hiking with me.
That would probably not be me in the friend group as someone who doesn't love nature. I'll go check out the restaurant with you, though. When I'm in DC, we'll go check out restaurants.
Perfect. I can't wait. I'll add you to the list.
But we need that friend. But to point, like we need, if you take the non-outdoor friend hiking, it's going to feel like, I love spending time with you. Like, Keara's great. Like, I'm so excited to see her. But this is not... something feels a little off here, then like, could we go, play cornhole or,
exactly. Is there a winery nearby? Right. So exactly. And that's it. And you're not changing, right? Like you're the same person. You just have these different sides of you that you like to kind of fill, and you call different friends who can kind of fulfill those different needs at those different times. That's really how I view serving multiple audiences, right? So
that's such a great analogy.
Yeah. The identity is not changing. It's just what you're showing the benefits that will benefit that audience, which will be different than the benefits that might be more appealing to a different audience, but it's all part of the same whole. It's all pieces of the same pie. And that's also just really important to keep, because it's so easy to get carried away sometimes when you're being very audience focused, which we all should be, but it's really easy to get lost in that and kind of chase after what you think that audience is demanding rather than having it also anchor back and tie back to who your brand is and who your voice is. So it's always important to kind of keep that in mind. Like you still are who you are, and you don't want to stray too far from that.
Well, I think another side of the friendship that we need to talk about is not just, your audience, but the brand versus demand. Like you're creating content and it can live in both. But I'm genuinely curious, and I'm curious too if this is the same answer. Do you think that Clutch, from a service provider, if I'm leading marketing at a company and we want to invest in Clutch, whether that's actually purchasing intent data or, leveraging services or just making an intentional directive to improve reviews. Do you think that is a brand or a demand action?
Yeah, with Clutch, that is just so much our brand. But I think the demand comes when you're anchored in your brand, right? So then people know what to come to you for. They know that they are able to identify their own needs, their own problems that need solving. And then I think the mark of a really strong brand is that they know where to go for that. So if you're able to really kind of define yourself and your brand and your voice and your identity, then they're going to know who to come from. And of course, there are elements of getting your name out there and making sure, just general audience acquisition and name recognition and all of those things kind of aside. The strength of a brand will inherently generate and draw in demand. Not saying that there are not other teams that should be going after the demand generation part of it. But in terms of content, when we're talking about content, the real benefit is making that brand strong enough so that the demand comes.
I love that. Say that again. Say the clever phrase again. Demand is anchored.
When you're anchored in your brand, the demand comes.
Yes. Oh, all right. That's the line that needs to be embroidered in a pillow from this episode and put in every marketer's living room. I mean, one of the things that I've just thought so much about in prep of this episode is this idea of brand and how it shows up through the voice of your customer. I mean, obviously a big part of Clutch is those reviews, like you said, and getting those authentic experiences from customers. And it's so interesting that you can sit in a room and build the brand you think you are or you want to communicate. But I think the real test is, okay, now go read your reviews. And are your value props showing up in the actual words of your customers? What are they saying is their favorite thing about you? And the mark of a great brand is, those should be pretty aligned. But if there's some sort of disconnect, then as a marketer, either the narrative's off or your segmentation's off. What happens if you see kind of a misalignment in those authentic reviews and what you want to be known for?
yeah, I think that's probably most marketers' worst nightmare, I would guess, right? If you have this whole idea, you are so kind of are concrete and confident in who you are as a brand and what your voice is, and then what you're hearing is something completely different. Not to kind of again make it personal, but there's a certain, element. Let's say if you've received the same feedback from 4 different friends that you interrupt people all the time, maybe you should think about not interrupting people all the time, right? Like there's a certain element, you reach a point of critical mass to where if everyone is viewing your brand in a certain way, then you have to look at it and think, and I used a negative example, but it could also be positive.
For sure.
Negative for no reason.
Yes. But that's unfortunately probably where our mind goes though, is like, where are we missing the mark?
Because that's how it feels, right? If you feel like you're not getting yourself across in the way that you want to be, it feels like a failure on your part. And I do think it's a disservice to necessarily view it that way, because maybe your customers see something in your brand or see a value that you're not capitalizing on yet, right? So maybe it's giving you a slight pivot or pointing you in a slightly different direction.
But even on a product is just maybe even understanding use case. Like they might give you feedback, hey, you interrupt me, but you might view it as, oh, I'm finishing your sentence because I know you so well. But you're interpreting that as, I feel like we're going really deep in this metaphor. I love it. You maybe interpret that as me interrupting you because I'm being flippant or, not engaged. But I view it as, hey, I know you. I'm on the same wavelength as you. Like, yes, we're engaging. And I could see that in like product usage. Hey, this was what we think the feature or this product is meant to help you with, but it's somehow not doing it.
It can make you, as a marketer, it can be a bit of like a hit to the ego if you're thinking I'm putting all this effort into getting this one point across and no one's hearing it, right? That can be really frustrating.
Yeah.
But, and again, it kind of depends on the kind of feedback you're hearing. But if it's just that other parts of your brand are being highlighted more, or if it's, a use case that you never thought of, and I feel like there are examples of this in tech all over the place where people are kind of just messing around with code and with one goal in mind. And it turns out they stumble upon some other like super useful thing that kickstarts a new company that's like gets like unicorn status or something, right? They just, if you are too married to the end result, you'll definitely leave value on the table in the process. So really kind of trying to check that ego and look at it, look at the feedback kind of as objectively as you can and think, okay, what here is resonating? Do I think this is real? Do I think this is maybe just like a crabby person leaving a crappy review, right? Like you have to kind of do your own little internal audit, but trying to avoid the knee-jerk reaction, I think, of they're wrong or this is terrible or we're not. I think that is a disservice. You have to be able to kind of take a wide-angle lens and think, okay, is what this person describing the kind of brand we want to be? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you like lean into that a little bit more. And if the answer is no, then you're like, okay, so our messaging is off. Let's go back to the drawing board and try to really connect with our audience the way that we're intending to.
Yep. Well, and we talked a lot about someone who's really anchored in brand often leads to demand. And that's kind of the conversion of the narrative is like, is the narrative striking the right chord? When someone is ready to buy, to point, they've probably been engaging with your brand and your narrative 5 to 10 times before they ever get to a sales conversation, and especially before they get to a contract. And so how do you build that narrative so that when they're ready to convert, or even to potentially even convince them that now is the right time to convert, like where does that conversion, and is that conversion messaging, or is it more, I guess, like the tactical, like having off ramps so that when they're ready to convert, it's super easy versus like having to kind of push, all right, buy now, sign up today. It's, I'll throw in a free whatever for $9.99 if you call the next time. You know what I mean? Like the messaging versus more of the mechanisms.
Yeah, I think when you talk about kind of the tactics versus kind of that more narrative strategy, what it really comes back to is being able to provide value for someone. That's why they're going to go. And I think this is one of the biggest areas that content can really step up to the plate that I think a lot of companies are now, again, like bring AI back into it with generative AI tools. It feels more accessible to be able to create a lot of content. So now more companies are really buying into its value, which is a really exciting time to be in this space. But you really have to be creating that content just to be useful with really very little else in mind. And I don't mean that you ignore the tactics to be driving them down funnel. We want to make sure that, like you said, those off-ramps are super readily available in the form of CTAs, or maybe it's in the form of pop-ups on the page, or, just like a right rail that is able to guide them to where they might want to go next. But, if you think about it, like I spring up friends all the time, right? But like if you're doing a friend a favor, it's not a favor if you're expecting something in return, right? And then that person's not going to come to you when they need another favor if you're always kind of making them feel guilty about it, or if it's a tit for tat, or you're holding it over their head. So the primary purpose really has to be building that useful content.
Yep.
And again, that's what we're now seeing with the algorithm updates. That's what's really being placed at the center of a lot of strategy, because it's what really resonates with people and it's what's really useful. So that has to definitely be the priority, is the usefulness, and then being able to create kind of the right webs, if you will, to drive them further down funnel and to just re-engage with you. I think a mistake that often content marketers make is that they'll make a piece of content and they'll measure success as if a user takes like 3 more steps down the line. And again, you're just really leaving a lot of value on the table if you're only judging it against, like, did this person in 5 days do this specific thing on my website? Like, maybe, but also you have to kind of meet people where they're at, and they're not, there are very few people who are going to click on a piece of content and be ready to go through that whole process. So you just have to be able to serve them wherever they're at. And that's where these big kind of content libraries, which is what like a big focus of ours for the rest of this year, is really building up that content library so that wherever someone is in their own process, whether it's just that really top level research before they start reaching out to people, or whether, maybe they're a bit closer to purchase and they're trying to form their budget. We have budgeting templates and we have pricing guides so that when they're in that kind of middle funnel area, when they're trying to really plan it out, they have those resources available to them. And those are just on our site, on our directories. So you really have to be creating all of that, the useful tools and content that will be useful regardless, for different parts of that journey, and not necessarily tie the success to a purchase all the way down the line, right? Because people see through that and they just won't do it. They'll pick and choose what's useful to them.
Well, I think that's why there's this, to gate or not to gate debate on content. And a lot of times people don't want to fill out a form. I mean, yes, forms can be annoying, but it's mainly because they know as soon as they fill out a form, they're going to get harassed by salespeople. Kind of like, okay, you do me this favor, now I'm expecting you to get on a call. And sometimes that works. And yeah, sometimes they are ready. But if it was more of just a, hey, you fill out this, but then you're going to keep getting value because you gave us this information, and whenever you're ready, we're here, that's a very different experience.
Exactly. And that's how we kind of view it. We are having some conversations around gating content and what kind of content do we want to be gating. And really what it comes down to for us is just making sure that we're really thoughtful about what those pieces of content are, and also ensuring that they're really high value pieces of content. But also kind of in addition to that big high value piece of content, how can we draw out individual smaller pieces of content for that big content, right? And what angle can we break out for a shorter blog post, right?
Yep. Repurposing for the win.
Exactly. It'd be very useful. It's a win-win. It's very useful for the buyer who's reading it. And then also if they're interested and they want to see the whole value, then they do get pushed into that kind of gated funnel. And part of this strategy is really looking at our email communications. If someone's giving us their email address, we're really thoughtful about how we're communicating with them with that. Are we, let's make sure we're giving them enough time in between communications. We don't want to be bombarding people. Do they have options to opt out? Do they have options to opt into specific kinds of content that would be interesting and useful for them kind of moving forward just in their daily kind of work life? So really looking at it completely holistically is the best way to really get an effective content strategy, because really it's so many teams who have to be talking to each other. You can't just be like, well, we're putting stuff on the blog and well, we're sending emails and you have to look at it as all of these pieces like to 1,000 piece puzzle, because that's really what content is.
Well, and the repurposing piece, I think, also helps with that consistent narrative. If you can invest and get everyone on the same page for that one or giant piece of content, and then that's being repurposed across the line, it kind of helps keep that narrative consistent because now the blog team is plugging into something that everyone's aligned to. The social team's plugging into something everyone's aligned to.
Yep, exactly. And we internally as a marketing department, we work super closely, really collaboratively. Our content marketing team is different than our brand marketing team. And we also have a demand gen team who kind of dabbles in both the service provider and buyer side. So we really make sure that we're all talking to each other and that we have really regular touch points and be able to really, like you said, with repurposing, making sure that we're feeding all of those channels and that we're on the same page with what we're saying.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to marketers who want to lean into a narrative-first content strategy?
I would say it's daunting, but you have to do the hard work of really identifying your brand. And that's really hard because it's like, again, in your personal life, right? If you're thinking about like, who am I, right? That's a really daunting question for a lot of people to answer. And that's what you have to do for your brand. And it's a lot of work. It's really, I think if you come from a bit more of a marketing specific background or a bit more of a business specific background, it can be very tempting, I think, to just find, well, like where can we make money or where can we kind of get the largest group, the largest piece of the puzzle. And that needs to factor in, of course, you need to make sure that you're actually serving a need, right, that exists. But it's really important to make sure that that's not necessarily what's driving it and that what is driving the strategy is who you are. And, do you want to be a more formal brand that's appealing to enterprise companies, for example, or do you want to be a little more laid back and kind of appeal to a younger audience? There are a lot of considerations to make, and really getting all of that aligned and buttoned up in the beginning is really hard work. It takes a lot of long brainstorms. I've been involved in a lot of them, and we all know how brainstorms can work out sometimes, but it's having those hard conversations gets all of that really, really clear. And it makes everything down the road significantly easier because then you have something to refer back to. You can't refer back to your identity or your brand or your narrative if you don't know what that is. So that really has to be where you start. And it's a lot of work. And people often don't want to do it because it's hard, and I get it, but it pays dividends down the line. You're never going to be able to scale the way you want unless you kind of have that foundation buttoned up.
Yep. So send this segment to your leadership team, encourage them to get some time on the calendar and bring other folks in. I'm sure like to point your sales team, your delivery team, like they are very close to the market as well. And they're not always thinking, how does this impact our narrative or how does this impact marketing? But they have some great insights. And so if you can get them to give you, a little bit of time to give you those inputs, it's honestly, I think, so priceless in creating that narrative.
It's so valuable. We were talking about feedback before, right? Like being able to hear that from your sales team or anyone else who's kind of closer to that point of sale. It's really invaluable just to hear whatever they're hearing from people.
Agreed. Welcome to my favorite segment of the show, Friends Matter. Because while we know content matters, friends matter even more. So each week, we're celebrating a marketer who's doing amazing things. So if you have a peer, a teammate, or a friend that's creating content that matters, be sure to nominate them so that we can feature them. Go to Composely/friends-matter. That's compose.ly/friends-matter. To kick us off, I wanted to celebrate a personal friend of mine and a partner to Composely, Natalie Dickey. She has been a Webflow consultant for us for the last 2 years. She owns her own Webflow consulting company and has just been absolutely amazing. She's been a true partner to me, not only helping implement projects, but also educating and improving my skills in Webflow so that I can be a Webflow power user, whether I really want to or not. And anyone that I have ever introduced her to cannot say enough great things about her. And over the last 2 years, she's been working on a rebrand of her agency, becoming Spark Digital Studio. And she finally launched the new site this past week. It's sparkdigitalstudio.com. And just really excited for her. I know she's been working on it in the background while also servicing all her clients. And just really want to celebrate that. So go check out sparkdigitalstudio.com. And if you need Webflow, shameless plug, I cannot think of a better Webflow consultant or Webflow support. So check her out. But congrats, Natalie, and way to go. And if you want to be featured or feature one of your friends, let us know who we can help celebrate in your life by going to composely.com/friends-matter. Thanks for listening to this episode of Content Matters, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. If you like the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. Otherwise, you can find all the resources you need to stay connected with us in the show notes. Till next time.